The back three, the pace, the power, the pace. It's very rare people talk about the back three in any sort of real detail, which is a shame and kind of bizarre because everyone seems to have all the answers, knowledge and expertise whenever anything goes wrong in those positions. But don't worry, my class of eager-eyed and eared students of the NGJ School for Gifted Youngsters, I am here to help, and I'm going to start today's lecture with the role of the wings. Now, the role of wingers has evolved over the years. At the beginning it was basically just where you put your fastest player on your team, so that when he got the ball he could do damage, and that basic summary of the position stayed the same really until 1995, and a certain man who you've probably heard of burst onto the scene and changed the game, that man being Joe Nalomu, whose combination of power and pace opened up the rugby world to the possibilities of players on the wing in different styles. Add into that the dawn of professionalism in that year, and you had rugby league converts coming over who had already been professional athletes, bringing their own styles and physical assets to the party. Players like John Bent, they all bring in new ideas and attributes to rugby union wing play. And these ideas and styles have evolved now in the professional game, to the point that wingers in rugby can now be summarised in one big broad statement, which is to be the athletic X factor for your team, to be the lightning in the bottle, try-scoring, defender-beating intangible, to be that thing that you can't really coach or teach. And with this role comes a lot of freedom to express yourself and try things to beat your man, which is why I believe this position is the most free position on the field for pure creative freedom, where if you have the right attributes you can be really effective. A lot of outside centres get a new lease of life when they go out on the wing, as they find so much space and freedom to do whatever they want to do. And a player's natural physical attributes are key to the way the individual will play on the wing, and instead of my usual sexy categories, I've decided to instead use a graph. I know, it's brilliant and truly exceptional. You're welcome. So in each section of this three-circle graph, you have one of the three major physical attributes of attacking wing play. These are strength, speed, and evasiveness, otherwise known as the ability to beat a man, otherwise known as footwork, otherwise known as that thing that Jason Robertson had that made him amazing. And every effective winger fits somewhere within this diagram, and wherever a player fits dictates the way they play. So for examples of your strong wingers, think your old school 2010 prime Alassana Tuolangi, or Wesley Vinacola, or for more recent examples, Nemani Nandolo and Naira Vora. All these players use their physical dominance to beat a defender in the wide channel, whilst also being quick enough to play on the wing. These kind of players often used by their clubs off set pieces to try and use that physicality to make yards in the midfield. And this has a few upsides with them getting you going forward usually during those plays, and often after a while these players just get drafted into playing in the centres, but in my opinion this is a complete waste of these kind of players' talents. They're not supposed to be the guy who gets you those hard yards in the midfield, who does big carry after big carry like a running back in the NFL. They are supposed to be the guy who, once he gets a clean break, or you put him into space and he's got a head of steam up, is nigh on impossible to stop. This type of player does have its drawbacks. Against purely speed wingers, they can come unstuck, and usually have to be really good readers of the game to counteract this. It's like how Bastareaud never really gets gassed if he plays in the centres. It's all about reading the game. But the biggest downside to playing this style is it's extremely hard to manage and often can't be managed long term. Alassana Tuolangi is probably the best example of longevity and keeping himself in good condition. But even he, towards the end of his career, when he went to Japan for a brief stint, took his foot off the gas and came back, and he wasn't the same player. It's a fine line these players are walking with them becoming unfit or ineffective if they tilt even a couple degrees to either side. For other examples of this, look at sports stars like Shaquille O'Neal, who in his prime was unstoppable, but his prime was only a few years, as it is a mighty task to keep all that mass in peak condition. And speaking of peak condition, let's go on to players whose main physical attribute is their speed. These sort of players I refer to as gas men, and are the sort of players that casual rugby fans probably think of when they think of a player on the wing. And they are, as their nickname suggests, men and women of great straight line gas and speed, and their teams will deploy them as such. These are the guys you want on the end of your elaborate backs move, just to run it in and make all the commotion worth it. Your best examples of players like this are Brian Habana and Johnny May. These kinds of players are usually so quick that they don't even have to fend people most of the time. They either get to the line through their own momentum, or the person can't even get close enough to them to begin with. And other than that, there isn't much to say about these players who play like this. They're sort of what they say on the tin, fast blokes with usually a tiny bit of agility, not enough that the defenders fear them stepping them, but enough that they can change their running angle and cause some damage. And speaking of players who can step, let's talk about the third and final attribute, evasiveness or agility or stepping. Basically just the ability to beat your man one-on-one or get to his or her weak shoulder. Players who are good at this are some of my favourite players to watch, not just because the act of someone both mentally and physically outmatching someone is both entertaining and compelling, but also because of how hard it is to do this consistently and be effective. It's a game of double bluffs, usually when you're trying to step a defender one-on-one, and usually when you get a reputation for it, people start double teaming you and covering whichever side you prefer stepping towards. And players who can have consistent success while using this style are a dime a dozen, and the only players I've seen maintain success consistently are Shane Williams and Jason Robertson, and if I'm being generous, Nahem Milner-Skaya. Players who actually weren't as quick as you might think in a straight line, but the combination of their footwork and speed made them so difficult to defend. And speaking of combinations, the best wingers in the world will often fall in between the circles of my graph. So for players who are both strong and fast, you have players like Tuasova at Toulon. If you want speed and agility, you have Anthony Watson. And then in the holy grail of wingers, you have ones who have everything. Wasaki Naholo, George North circa 2013, Julian Surveyor circa 2015, and of course the great Jonah Lomu. These are your unicorns, athletic X-Factor incarnate, that if utilised correctly, are genuinely unstoppable. Now that I've done the wingers, let's go on to the man pulling the strings in the back three, the fullback. Now, the fullback position, like the wing, has evolved over the years, with it first being thought of as a bit of an afterthought of a position where a player could sort of be a passenger in the game and catch a few high balls. Then over the years, its influence in the game grew, with people starting to use the position to counter-attack teams. Then with the likes of France's Serge Blanco making a name for himself by coming into the attacking line with real pace. Then there were players like Andre Joubert who took a step further, and then came the dawn of professionalism. And with that, the styles of playing fullback became much clearer. So, first up you have, I'm just going to call a spade, winger fullbacks. These are players who would be just as useful if they were playing on the wing, as they're basically doing the same job. And if you get the ball off a kick and it's on, run. If not, kick. And if you get the ball in open field, take someone on and see if you can beat them. This isn't to downplay what they do, as you have to be pretty brilliant to do it, but their style is simple and suits both positions. Players in this mould include Jason Robertson when he played fullback, and Anthony Watson, and Corey Jane when he was at fullback. Now to the next style, distributing fullbacks. Yes, the return. If you've watched my video on the role of centres, you will know what coaches do if they have two good 10s in a squad. But for those who haven't watched, which is none of you, right, because all of you watch my videos, please subscribe, I need to eat. Coaches will try and see if they can sneak both 10s into their starting lineup, either to get as many ball players on the field as possible, or as many of his or her best players onto the field as possible. And they usually slot them in at 12, but sometimes they try and slot them in at fullback. Eddie Jones and Stuart Lancaster both did it with Cipriani, the Springboks tried to do it with Morné Steyn and Patrick Lambie, and most recently the All Blacks are trying to do it with Richie Mwanga and Bowden Barrett, which unfortunately might actually work. But anyway, the skill set of this player is usually a fly half with higher than average flair, pace and an eye for a gap, and they are used usually by their team to get the ball to their wingers as quickly as possible, whilst also being a handy bit of X factor in the midfield, picking their passes carefully and nudging kicks in behind. They are rare, but if you find a way to make it work, you have something truly special. And then the last one is the all-round fullback. Now this kind of player has usually played fullback all their life, and it kind of shows, as whenever you put them in any other position they just look a little awkward. Sure, they will be effective, but it's not quite the same as having them in the middle of the park. I'm talking your Mike Browns, your Israel Daggs, your Chris Lathams, your Rob Carneys, your Stuart Hoggs, players renowned for being under the high ball, countering and coming into the line at pace and picking gorgeous angles. And now that I've talked about the role of the back three in attack, it's now time to talk about the back three's role in defence, which, like everything in rugby, is stupidly complex. Now, to play the back three in the pro game, you have to have certain base levels of skill set in the following areas: a certain level of speed, a certain level of fitness, and a certain level of aerial prowess. If you don't, you can't play there. Simple, and here's why. The back three in defence do so much unnecessary running and so much catching of the high ball, it's ridiculous. Playing in the back three is a constant headache of thinking, does the 13 need me in the line? Does the 15 need me back? I'm just running back and forth between the initial defensive line and the back three. But let me explain in more basic terms. So if you're a winger in defence in the open field, depending on your team's defensive structure, most of the time, unless you're in your own 22, you will find yourself tucked back to about 10 to 15 metres from your defensive line, and whoever is the last man at the end of the defensive line. This is so if the attack pass it more than 2 times, you can come up and help out whoever is in the 13 channel. If they don't try and run the ball and put boot to it, you are far enough back to be able to either catch it or help out your fullback. And that's your job, going up and down running shuttles covering space, with the fullback being the main organiser, usually patrolling the backfield, feeding information to his wingers, as all back three players work in a pendulum of 3, where if one winger goes up, the fullback goes into that space, and the other winger dropped, with it working the same the other way. So like playing in the midfield, you're working in a 3 to cover space. And for those of you wondering if there's a difference between playing on the right wing or the left wing, there is, but it's just slightly different. So if you're a player who's inexperienced playing on the wing, you go on the right. This is because Most people are right-footed and right-side dominant passing, and of kickoffs your team will most likely kick towards the left, and most box kicks will happen on that side of the field, as well as the fact that people like to open up their body when they kick, so naturally more work for the left winger. Furthermore, any kicks that go towards the right wing are more likely to go out, just because people are kicking across themselves and have less control of it. I told you it's overly complicated. But that's basically it in terms of the defensive role of the back three. Of course you have your one-on-one tackling that's expected of you, especially at fullback, but that's all very self-explanatory, and that is where I'm going to end this lesson. I hope you guys have enjoyed the role of the back three. Signed NGJ.